Three killers. Three moments where the internet moved faster than every badge, every warrant, every official investigation combined. In one case, the community warned police for 2 years before anyone listened. In another, a public database dismantled 40 years of silence in months. In the third, a Reddit thread gave a murdered woman back her name after 4 decades of institutional failure. These are the most evil cases the internet exposed before police did. And in every single one, the system had every chance to get there first. It didn't. Case 1. Luka Magnotta, the killer. The internet warned police about. In 2010, a forum thread appeared on a true crime website with a title that felt, at the time, like hyperbole. Is Luka Magnotta a killer? The thread was started by a woman who had been tracking a series of videos posted online. Videos showing a young man suffocating kittens in vacuum-sealed bags and feeding live kittens to a Burmese python. The videos were disturbing enough on their own. What made them different was the man making them. He wasn't hiding. He was performing. He wanted to be watched. And the people watching him started asking a question that the videos themselves seemed designed to answer. The thread grew. Users began documenting everything. The usernames Magnotta posted under, the locations his IP addresses suggested, the pattern of escalation in the videos. They were not just disgusted viewers. They were building a case file. By 2011, the community had identified Magnotta by name, had linked him to multiple accounts across multiple platforms, and had compiled enough documented evidence to fill a police report. So they filed one. Multiple times. Animal cruelty organizations sent warnings to law enforcement in Canada. Forum users contacted police directly. The documentation they had assembled was specific, organized, and credible. Police did not act. On May 25, 2012, Luka Magnotta murdered 33-year-old Jun Lin in Montreal. He filmed it. He posted the video online under the title, "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." Then he dismembered the body, mailed the body parts to the offices of Canadian political parties and 2 elementary schools, and boarded a flight to Europe. The same internet communities that had spent 2 years warning police about him were the first to identify the killer in that video. They recognized him within hours. When Magnotta landed in Paris and then traveled to Berlin, Interpol had already issued an international warrant. But it was a customer at an internet cafe in Berlin who recognized him from the online manhunt photos circulating on social media. That customer called police. Magnotta was arrested on June 4, 2012, 10 days after the murder. The internet had warned them. They had not listened. And when it was over, the same community that built the original case file was the one that closed it. Luka Magnotta was convicted of first-degree murder in December 2014 and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The forum thread that started with, "Is Luka Magnotta a killer?" had been right for 2 years before anyone with a badge believed it. Case 2. The Golden State Killer. How a public database ended a 40-year secret. Joseph James DeAngelo had been hiding in plain sight for 40 years. Between 1974 and 1986, he committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries across California. He was known by different names to different investigators: the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, because the crimes were so geographically spread that law enforcement agencies never connected them as the work of a single person, until it was too late. By the time investigators understood the scale of what had happened, DeAngelo had simply stopped. He retired from his crimes the way someone retires from a job. Got a house in Sacramento, kept a low profile, waited. For 40 years, he waited. And for 40 years, the case went nowhere. What changed wasn't police work. It wasn't a tip. It wasn't a deathbed confession or a witness coming forward after decades of silence. What changed was a public genealogy database called GEDmatch, and a retired investigator named Paul Holes, who had spent decades obsessed with the Golden State Killer case and refused to let it calcify. In 2017, investigators uploaded DNA recovered from original crime scenes to GEDmatch. The database is public. Anyone can upload raw DNA data from a consumer ancestry kit, and genealogists, volunteers, not law enforcement, began building family trees from the partial matches that came back. Branch by branch, generation by generation, narrowing the field from thousands of distant relatives to hundreds, from hundreds to dozens, from dozens to a single name. Joseph James DeAngelo, retired police officer, age 72, living in a suburb of Sacramento. Investigators retrieved a DNA sample from DeAngelo's discarded trash in April 2018. It matched the crime scene DNA exactly. He was arrested 2 days later, taken from his driveway in handcuffs, while his neighbors watched in disbelief. The man who had hidden for 40 years was undone not by a detective, not by an informant, not by anything the official investigative apparatus produced, but by a public database that anyone with an ancestry kit and patience could access. DeAngelo pleaded guilty in 2020 to 13 counts of first-degree murder and admitted to the full scope of his crimes to avoid the death penalty. He is serving 11 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The genealogy volunteers who built those family trees, who narrowed 40 years of silence down to a name in Sacramento, received no official credit in the initial announcement. Their work was described only as investigative genealogy techniques. But what they had done was give investigators something 4 decades of professional law enforcement had never produced: a name. The Golden State Killer had outsmarted every badge that came after him for 40 years. He could not outsmart a public database, and the people who knew how to read it. 2 cases down. 2 moments where the internet moved faster than the system. But the third case is different from both of them, because in this one, the killer was never caught. And what the internet did instead was something that might matter even more. Case 3. Linda Pagano. The name a brother always knew. Christina Skates thought she was killing time when she stumbled across a cemetery ledger entry that would consume the next several years of her life. Line 82,483. Unknown white female. Rocky River Reservation, Cleveland, Ohio. 1975. That was all there was. No name, no family, no investigation anyone was still actively running. Just a clinical entry in a database, and the bones of a young woman that 3 teenage boys had found in the winter woods, and that the system had filed away and largely forgotten. Christina requested the case files from Lieutenant Silvas. What arrived was brutal in its honesty. Crime scene photographs of a skull pulled from the mud along Rocky River. Forensic documentation of a .25 caliber bullet lodged in the left temple. Scattered remains, animal scattered across winter woods, with the jawbone completely missing and only 5 teeth remaining. A young woman, estimated around 20 years old, shot once and abandoned in the woods outside Cleveland, like she never existed. The case had sat untouched in boxes for nearly 40 years. Christina worked it alone for months. She cross-referenced missing persons databases. She dug through archived newspaper microfilm at local libraries and found almost nothing. A murder discovered by 3 teenage boys barely registered as a news brief in 1975. Without media pressure, there was no public awareness. Without public awareness, there were no tips. And without tips, the case just calcified into bureaucratic silence. But Christina had one resource the 1975 investigators never had. So in 2016, she took the case files, the crime scene photographs, the forensic details Lieutenant Silvas had trusted her with, and she posted everything to Reddit and web sleuths. What happened next was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the Strongsville Jane Doe had thousands of eyes on her. For the first time in 4 decades. Genealogists, former law enforcement, forensic enthusiasts, amateur researchers, all converging on a single thread. The internet had just inherited a cold case the system forgot, and it was not going to let it stay cold. Within the first 48 hours, users had already done something the original detectives never could. They pooled access to genealogy databases across multiple platforms simultaneously. Ancestry, Find a Grave, newspaper archives, state death indexes. Running parallel searches that would have taken a single researcher months to complete alone. Christina had spent weeks hitting walls solo. The community dismantled several of those same walls in a single weekend. But the thread didn't just generate speed. It generated expertise. One user flagged that the victim's skeletal age estimate of around 20 was consistent with incomplete wisdom tooth development, a detail buried in the forensic report that had never been publicly emphasized. Another, with a background in physical anthropology, pointed out that the single shot to the left temple, combined with the deliberate abandonment of the body in a wooded reservation, suggested someone who knew the area. This wasn't a random dumping ground. Rocky River Reservation was specific, intentional. The killer had been there before. That observation reframed everything. Do you think an ordinary person with internet access and the right obsession can outsolve professional investigators? Or does it just look that way in hindsight? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what the thread found next was about to change everything. Forensic sketch artist Carl Koppelman noticed the case on web sleuths and created a facial reconstruction from the Strongsville Jane Doe's skull. The reconstruction bore a striking resemblance to a photograph that had just been uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database. A young woman named Linda Pagano. Here is what made that match feel almost cruel in retrospect. Linda's brother Mike had actually contacted police back in 1975, right after the original discovery made a brief television news spot. He had watched that report and immediately thought, "That sounds like my sister." He called. He told them he had a missing sibling, and investigators turned him away, telling him the remains belonged to someone too tall and too old to be Linda. Mike Pagano had been 3 feet from the truth in 1975, and the system sent him home. That detail hit the Reddit thread like a detonation, because it meant this wasn't just a case that went cold from lack of information. Someone had come forward. A family member had raised his hand and said, "I think that's her." And the official response was essentially, "You're wrong. Go away." What the Reddit community had done, and what Christina had made possible by putting the case files in front of thousands of eyes, was create a second chance for that door. The forensic artist's comparison between the reconstruction and Linda Pagano's newly uploaded photo was the moment the thread stopped being a research exercise and started becoming something that could actually reach a family that had been waiting over 4 decades for an answer. DNA samples from Mike and his sister were requested. The science was finally about to catch up to what a brother's instinct had already known since 1975. In October 2017, the remains were exhumed. After DNA samples were sent to the University of North Texas, the match was confirmed in June 2018. 44 years after 3 teenage boys found her bones on a riverbank. 44 years after her brother tried to tell someone who she was. Mike's response when he got the news was quiet and exhausted, in the way only decades of waiting can produce. "I pretty much figured it was her. I wasn't really surprised. Relieved. It's basically over, and we get some closure. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just done. Carrying something that should have been resolved before he was middle-aged." Linda Pagano's killer has never been identified. But Linda Pagano is no longer unknown white female bones on line 82483. She is Linda Pagano. She has a brother named Mike who knew her face the moment he saw that forensic reconstruction. She has a family that waited longer than most people wait for anything. And she has a name on a headstone now, which is more than the system that buried her ever gave her. 3 cases. 3 moments. A forum that warned police for 2 years and was ignored, until the killer they had documented walked into a Berlin cafe and someone recognized his face. A public database that a group of volunteers used to dismantle 40 years of silence and hand law enforcement the name of a man who had hidden in plain sight since 1974. And a Reddit thread that gave a murdered woman her identity back after 4 decades of institutional failure. Because a college student couldn't let go of a cemetery ledger entry, and thousands of strangers decided they wouldn't either. The system is not the enemy in any of these stories. But the system has limits, structural limits, resource limits, jurisdictional limits, that it was not built to overcome on its own. What the internet added to each of these cases was not intelligence. It was scale. Thousands of people, each one scanning a different corner of the same problem, and occasionally one of them sees something that every official investigator had looked at and missed. In Magnotta's case, that cost a life that might have been saved. In the Golden State Killer case, it cost 40 years of justice for survivors who had already waited long enough. In Linda Pagano's case, it cost a brother half a lifetime, carrying a question that the system had the answer to in 1975 and chose not to hear. The internet remembers. That is not always a comfortable thing. But in these three cases, it was the only thing that worked. Subscribe. The next case file is already open.